my focus today is going to be looking at some interdependencies between the water sector and some of the other critical sectors that are out there. As we go through this, obviously you guys know I can't touch on them all. We just don't have enough time, and even the points that I'm going to bring up and make are probably going to be a bit on the abbreviated side, but hopefully it'll illuminate some things. We'll talk about a couple of events and then maybe a few takeaways, and to Bryson's point earlier, maybe a little homework. So just real briefly, and I'm not going to dwell on this. So I'm Andy Krapf. I'm the Director of Operations Technology for Loudoun Water. We're a combined water and wastewater utility about 45 minutes west of here. So we are in the Washington metro area. I've been doing this for a while. I've been in the OT space before it was called OT, like a lot of folks, and have a big focus, obviously, on cybersecurity and participate in the Water ICS Cybersecurity Committee. So Loudoun Water has a great distinction that we are not a municipality, so we are not bound by some of the constraints that other jurisdictions have. So we may not be as typical as some jurisdictions around the country. We're not, our revenue stream is not based on taxes. It's based on fee for service. So we're a little different model. So some of this may or may not translate as we go forward for everybody. So really what we're going to talk about is kind of a big picture. We're going to talk a lot about sector relationships, then we're going to really focus on some things that can be done. Crown jewel analysis is one of the things that I like to hit on. And then we'll talk a little bit about risk versus vulnerability, and then some concluding thoughts. So we all know the 16 sectors that are out there right now. Again, I can't dwell on all of them. I have a little question mark here at the end because down the road, there may be more critical sectors. So we think about, there's been talk about space infrastructure as a critical sector. I would also posit perhaps there may be another sector called artificial intelligence as an AI, as it develops, right? That's just my take on things. It may not necessarily fit well within the information technology sector. As an emerging technology, there may be some things that are out there, but we're really going to talk about a couple of sectors in particular. So we're going to think about the big picture here when it comes to relationships between water and a couple other key sectors. And my animation is not working here, so I'm not quite sure why that is the case. So forgive the confusion on the screen. I hope the follow-on ones are not quite so bad. So we're going to talk about water, transportation, power, and communications, and the interplay between those different sectors, again, from a water sector point of view. So the first thing I want to hit on is chemical. So the water sector is really dependent upon chemical production, right? We use a variety of chemicals throughout treatment processes, whether they're in the water side or the wastewater side. You can't have clean water, but just by pulling it out of the river, right? That doesn't work. Likewise, we can't just take sewage and do some basic treatment and dump it back in the river, right? That doesn't really solve anything. So we're really dependent upon a lot of chemicals that are out there. Some of these are very high risk chemicals. Whether it's chlorine, which is a typical one, so chlorine gas, right? That's what the Nazis in World War I used to kill troops, right? And chlorine gas is a very noxious thing. But there are also a lot of other chemicals or precursors to parts of our processes that we have to deal with. If you're in a facility that uses ozone, the precursor to ozone is liquid oxygen. Liquid oxygen is also what is used to make rocket engines. So there are some really key chemical precursors that are used throughout. We use acids, we use bases, we use all kinds of different things. And not all those are manufactured here in the States in bulk quantity. Some of those are foreign sourced. EPA has a really good study out that, as I've shown on the screen here, which basically is the understanding of what those chemical supply chains are, and what the criticality of both the chemicals and the precursors that go along with that, and where they're sourced from, whether they're sourced domestically or whether they're sourced overseas. It is, if you're in a situation and you have a foreign supplier of a precursor or a chemical, I can tell you as an asset owner, we only store so much chemical on site. And it may be 30 days, it may be 2 weeks, it could be 60 days, depends on the chemical. All the other jurisdictions are doing the same thing. So if hypothetically a foreign adversary turns off the spigot for that chemical precursor, we're all in the same boat. I can't just go to another jurisdiction and say, can I take 10% of your supply? Because they're going to say no, because they can't get it either. So dependency on the chemical manufacturing sector is really important to both water and wastewater treatment. It's something that we do pay close attention to on a regular basis. So how do we get those chemicals? How do we get spare parts? Transportation is, we're going to dwell on this for a couple minutes here. Transportation is really critical, right? So all of the chemicals that I have listed here are coming from various locations. We don't manufacture them, obviously, in any one location or in close proximity to our 49,000-ish water treatment plants and 16,000-ish wastewater treatment plants for municipalities. And some of these, you can think about the tariff situations going on right now and the slowdown at the ports. All that can have a lot of impact on how timely those chemicals are delivered to a water or a wastewater entity. And again, you can see here, there's some pretty nasty things that we have to contend with. The other thing I want to mention here real quick before I move on is also spare parts. So when you think about the things that we get to create automated systems, or even just the mechanical systems that are associated with water and wastewater, a lot of that is sourced overseas as well. I'll pick on Rockwell Automation because it's one I'm familiar with. Obviously, it's a U.S. company, but how much of their supply chain is overseas? If you're a fan of Cisco or Palo Alto or typical IT equipment, Dell, how much of their supply chain is overseas? Chip manufacturing. So all of that does come into play. If there is some specialized equipment, and we use a lot of specialized equipment for sensor technology within the water space, and that technology is manufactured in Europe, and the supply chain is 3 to 4 weeks or 6 weeks, and you can't get those because transportation is broken down, you're in a world, you could be in a world of hurt if you don't have enough spares, you haven't done your research, you haven't increased your inventories to overcome that period of time where you may not be able to have parts. You may have to do reduced service in order to overcome that problem. So a couple of high profile things that have happened in recent history. So you guys probably all remember East Palestine in Ohio was in the news for an awfully long time. So that was 2023. There was a derailment just east of the town. Fortunately for East Palestine, even though they're a ground well system, most of their wells were on the western side. You can see from this picture that's on here where the influences of the groundwater system to the wells in relationship to where the train derailment was. Fortunately, the chemicals that were on the train, which was some pretty nasty stuff, did not influence the wells. Had it influenced the wells, coupled with the fact that transportation was interrupted because the rail line was down, there wouldn't have been a whole lot of opportunity for the town in general, other than trucking in large quantities of water for the period of time until the infrastructure was repaired. There are also some downstream effects, pardon the pun here, because the tributaries that were in the area ultimately connect to the Ohio River. and you think about all the drinking water entities that are sourcing water from the Ohio, this could have a lot of downstream impacts. And it's something, when you think regionally, we have to take that into consideration as a water utility, especially in an area like Washington, D.C. here. All the folks that are along the Potomac that are upstream from here have a direct influence on all the downstream entities as well. So if there's pollution upstream, it affects everybody downstream. And you're going to see how that kind of ties in here. So this was a picture. For those of you who know the Harpers Ferry area, there was a train derailment back in 2019. Fortunately, there wasn't any chemicals on the train. However, this area being west of Frederick, west of Loudoun County, had this been a chemical spill of any quantity, would have affected everything from Leesburg, Frederick, Maryland, WSSC, Fairfax Water, all the downstream entities, large and small, would have had to contend with what could have been a fairly significant event. Little research here tells us that the trains over the trestle here, there's 25 to 40 trains a day. Some of those carry bulk cargo, including ethanol. And I'm sure they carry other chemicals as well into the area here. But those chemicals, that kind of contamination, should the worst happen, thinking of some of the things that were discussed earlier, nation state actors, bad actors, right? If somebody were to sabotage this area, you can see the different jurisdictions that could be affected downstream from where we are. And it is fairly significant when you take into consideration the size of the population. And as we all know, bad news travels faster than most things in the world. So the speed of societal panic is an interesting thing as you watch disasters unfold. So moving away from that a little bit, the water industry as a whole is very dependent upon communication infrastructure. Used to be, when I started in the industry many, many years ago, we were dependent upon licensed radio systems. So very first radio system I put in was a typical low and slow serial communication network, licensed frequencies through the FCC. Nobody else could get on them technically. And since it was serial, not really something that a hacker is going to be looking to do. The worst case scenario is somebody could jam us, right, if they really wanted to. The shift has been to move away from that, to deploy either cellular communications because they are very robust. Some folks are using fiber, combination thereof, satellite, Starlink, microwave communications, but a lot more on the commercial carrier side. So as a result of that, we are now much more vulnerable to salt typhoon. So the things that the communication sector is vulnerable to now becomes a vulnerability for the water sector as well. So if you're dealing with a typical larger utility that, or even a smaller one where you've got communication between, say, a variety of wells or pump stations to a central office, and that communication gets disrupted, what's the resiliency that goes along with it? Do you have redundant paths? Do you have emergency communications that you can spin up? Are you using, if you have redundant paths, are you using redundant carriers, right? It's not always just AT&T or all just Verizon. It's something that we all are become much more dependent upon. And if we're not designing things accordingly, we're going to get stuck with salt typhoon, takes down the carriers, and we're out of luck. So we need to be thinking about some of the conversation that hopefully Gus will be getting into is how are we designing our systems to be more resilient should we lose communications. So the next sector we're going to think about is energy. There's an obvious nexus between water and power. Couple of statistics. So not thinking about so much specific areas, but just in general. So nuclear power plants, open loop nuclear power plants consume about 25 to 60,000 gallons per megawatt hour produced. Closed loop system is much lower because it's a closed loop system. Coal plants, almost as much, right? Not much difference in a coal plant, right? So 20 to 50,000 gallons per megawatt hour. Even a natural gas fired plant is still consuming almost 3,000 gallons per megawatt hour. It's a lot. That puts stress and strain on the local utilities. And if you think about what's coming up with all these data centers that are popping up, this puts a lot of stress on the system, in addition to residential demands or emergency systems demands. So in 2020, the energy sector itself used 47.5 trillion gallons of water in the energy sector in the US. It's a lot. This graph is a little bit of an eye chart, but basically it kind of shows you a little bit of energy consumption on the water side. Now, this is looking at a water plant or what the water industry, how much energy it consumes. So this is the flip side of this. So light blue is supply. So think surface water and wells. The dark blue is your distribution. So getting treated water out to consumers. The little green arrows, that the green bands that are getting bigger, is desalination. So it's something we don't always think about. Let's see here. There's a very thin line. You can kind of see it a little farther out. That's for water reuse between the green and the yellow. Yellow is wastewater operations. So you can see wastewater is consuming more and more energy as we treat more and more of that. And then the orange area here, or brown, is what they're considering transfer. This is more of your conveyance systems that are coming back in on the wastewater side. So this was a study that was done back in 20, I think it was done in the 2021 range. So a little bit of looking backwards, a little bit looking forward, and some prediction as far as things moving out into the future. So you can see there's this symbiotic relationship between power and water, and that's something that just will not go away here in the near future. Another relationship, I think this is a really interesting slide here. So there was a study that was put out just this April by the GAO, and it talks about artificial intelligence, obviously as an emerging technology, but embedded in this study was an estimation of the amount of energy and water needed to power, if you will, to enable artificial intelligence. So 60 queries of an AI engine basically consumes a little over 1/4 gallon of water. That doesn't sound like a whole lot, but scale it up. I mean, if you guys think about how often you're starting to actually use AI queries, and how often, scale it up on a public scope, if you will, we're looking at over 1 million gallons a day for 250 million queries. It's very impactful. In Northern Virginia here, we have the largest data center corridor in the world. Our utility supplies cooling water to 45 data centers right now. Well, that's on our reclaim loop that we have, but there are more under construction every single day. Coming down here today, there's just lot after lot after lot that is just under construction right now. If you really want to see the impact of what it looks like, there's if you go to openinframap.org, you will see all the publicly available data pushed onto a map, and you will see all the data centers that are in the Northern Virginia area. It's quite astounding as far as what's there. So data centers are a huge issue for water utilities. There's a huge impact, and this is something that is going to continue to scale up, and something that we cannot ignore. We talked about hospitals. Hospitals obviously near and dear to a lot of folks here. Just a couple of key metrics on this one as well, right? So EPA put out emergency water supply planning guide for hospitals. Couple of key metrics for an average hospital of 100 to 200 beds, so it's a little on the larger side. Consumption is between 315 and 570 gallons per bed per day. I think it's per day. No, per bed. That may be, yeah, I think it's per bed per day. So if you're at 150 bed hospital, and I just picked numbers that were kind of mid scale, right? 440 gallons per bed, you're looking at 66,000 gallons per day for that facility. It's a big demand. And one thing that I posed a question earlier this morning that I will jump on here as well. Drinking water is not the only service that a hospital requires. Hospitals also require wastewater services. If you can't get rid of the medical waste, all that contaminated waste that's coming out of it, and again, this is embedded in the study here, most hospitals will shut down after a few hours because of the lack of sanitary services. So wastewater, when you think about the water industry, it's not just drinking water. Wastewater is a huge portion of that equation. So interdependency is really important, but let's think about what we can do. So offer up a problem, offer up a solution, right? I'm a big proponent of crown jewel analysis. So when we talk about crown jewel analysis, it's what are my most critical functions? What are the risks associated with it? What's my mitigation strategy? What's my resilience? How do I recover? What's my prioritization? You can do that internally and externally. In fact, I think that's something that we should do, right? Looking at things everywhere from business impact analysis, threat assessments, risk assessments. Definitely do your tabletop exercises. You know, it's the old warfighter scenario, right? We fight how we practice, right? So we definitely want to be making sure that we're practicing the same way that we would in the event that the real thing comes knocking on our door. Have a communications plan for external, right? If you're thinking about external things, regional crown jewel analysis is really important. Identify your key stakeholders, who are your key customers, who are your key suppliers. All those things are really important. I know this is a little bit of an eye chart here as well, but crown jewel analysis, we actually did one. We know what processes are key, how long it takes to recover those, how long we can go without that process being in place. Can it be run manually, right? Are there things that we can do? This is the way, in my opinion, you should be thinking about what your key processes are. How does that apply to your key customers and your key stakeholders? What's the prioritization, even for a water plant? If I had a black start my plant, what are my priorities? I don't make that determination. My operators do. The folks that hold the permit have to do that. Risk versus vulnerability. I will say real quickly, when we're identifying risk, it's not just the initial risk, it's also the residual risk. Because once you identify risk and you put effective controls in place, that's great. You're still going to have some residual risk. So identifying what my leftover residual is really important, because that kind of informs you as far as what your next steps could be. And again, it's an iterative process. And really some concluding thoughts here. And I'm just going to read the bottom one. It can't happen to me. Don't get caught for a lack of imagination, right? How many times have we all heard it can't happen to me because I'm too small, I'm not critical, I'm unimportant, I'm air gapped, right? Or I'm protected by somebody else, right? Don't ever assume that any of those things are true, because somebody else is going to be interested in you and what you do for the society around you. So with that being said, my last takeaway is the interconnecting entities, whether they're suppliers, other sectors, other utilities, their risk could be your risk. So that's all I have. Questions? Yes.
One of your external recommended actions was coordinate with other entities.
Yes.
Are there good mechanisms to do that? Formal mechanisms, or can you elaborate on that recommendation?
So the DC area, we're very lucky. So we have the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, and I'm sure there are other entities like that in various parts of the country. It really depends. Again, my experience is fairly limited to the region around here, but certainly through the ISACs, there's other mechanisms that can be leveraged to reach out. Other organizations could put you in touch with different governing councils in various regions. So I think that would be a good place to start.
And as far as also the cross-sector coordination, I assume because the focus is not an island, so the ISACs, which are generally sector focused, right?
Right, but there's also coordination between some of the ISACs. So multi-state ISAC is a great one because it's not just municipalities. There are other groups that are involved with multi-state. I'm a member of the multi-state ISAC as a water utility. It's a little bit regional driven. I mean, there's not a national way to do that, at least as far as I'm not aware.
From the ISAC perspective, we have the National Council of ISACs that many, like 25 or 26, 27 ISACs belong to. So we can coordinate that way. We have monthly meetings and whatnot. So if there's concerns, we have folks that we can reach out to from that perspective.
Okay. Thank you.